The penthouse office hung suspended above Boston like a throne room built from glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawled below, 1,000 lights scattered across dark water, and Aleandro Castellano stood motionless before them at 2:47 in the morning, his silhouette carved from shadow and expensive wool. Behind him, two men, Rocco and Gino, lieutenants for 15 years, held their breath without moving. The surveillance screens bathed the room in electric blue. 3 different camera angles. Same woman. Same furtive movements. Sofia Reynolds, the caretaker from Mercy Elder Care, slipping through the service entrance at midnight, bulging bags clutched against her chest, her head turning left, then right, then left again like a hunted animal checking for predators. Rocco watched his boss's jaw. The muscle there pulsed and twitched, a tiny telltale rhythm that meant someone's life was being calculated. Aleandro's voice emerged like gravel being crushed. Deep, not loud, but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. In my world, betrayal has only one price. Death. It is the foundation everything rests on. Without this code, there is no order. There is only chaos and blood. 3 weeks she has been stealing from me. 3 weeks of watching her move through my facilities like a thief in the night, and now she carries information that could dismantle everything I have built. The flashback came in sharp cuts. A younger face, similar bone structure, reaching for cash. Aleandro's brother. One moment of weakness. One decision to sell family secrets to enemies willing to pay for them. Then Aleandro's hand, steady, pulling a trigger. His own blood spilling across marble floor. Rocco had been there. They both had. Neither man spoke of it anymore. Some things lived in silence. Back to the screens. Sofia on camera 3, moving through the hallway toward the medication supply room. Camera 1 caught her ducking into shadows. Camera 2 showed the bag swelling with something heavy. Aleandro leaned closer, his fingers pressing against the desk's edge, and Rocco recognized this posture. This was the moment before the end began. But 3 blocks away, in a diner that smelled like grease and regret, Sofia Reynolds sat alone in a booth with checkered linoleum floors, and her hands trembled as she counted $34 by the glow of her phone screen at 3:22 in the morning. $34. She arranged them into neat piles. 2 20s. 2 singles. $30 that she had somehow saved from tips over 8 weeks of double shifts, the kind of shifts that left her feet bleeding into her socks and her voice raw from speaking to residents who could not always hear her. For dollars from selling her grandmother's silver bracelet at the pawn shop on Hanover Street. $1 found in the pocket of a dead resident's jacket, pressed into her hand by his grieving daughter, who said, "Take this, you are the only one who showed him kindness." $34. Beside the money lay a piece of paper, a foreclosure notice with official stamps and legal language that her eyes had read so many times the words had burned themselves into her mind. $125,000. Due in 14 days. Her apartment, the 1-bedroom in Dorchester where she and Emma slept in the same twin bed because Emma had nightmares and needed to feel another heartbeat, was being taken. The notice said it in formal language. The reality was simpler. She was about to be homeless. The diner hummed around her, a lonely sound, fluorescent lights buzzing against the blizzard that had turned the world into white chaos. November wind screamed against the windows, visibility erased completely, and Sofia sat in the empty restaurant because this was the only place she could sit where Douglas Hale, the manager, would not force her to work without pay, and where the cold was somehow more honest than the warmth of her own apartment where she could no longer afford the heat. She pulled out the shoes. Small. Child-sized. The first pair Emma had ever owned, worn on the day Sofia found her huddled behind the grocery store dumpster, 6 years old and speaking no English, terrified and abandoned and so small that Sofia thought her heart might crack open right there on the pavement. The laces were frayed now. The leather held memories of 6 years of running, playing, growing. Emma's whole life was contained in these shoes, everything that girl had survived, and Sofia held them against her chest the way other mothers hold their children. The blizzard howled like something alive and angry. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 3 years ago, somewhere between her last bad decision and her first good one. She just sat there, holding those shoes, counting money that would never be enough, and breathing in the smell of old coffee and broken dreams that had seeped into the diner's walls like a stain that could never be cleaned. This was the moment. This was the absolute worst moment, the one she had been dreading, and now it was here, solid as a fist against her ribs. Social services was coming. They were coming because Mrs. Chen from Mercy Elder Care had filed paperwork saying Emma was undocumented, and they were coming to take her, and Sofia had known this was coming for 3 weeks, had known it since the moment Mrs. Chen discovered Emma sleeping in the staff room during her lunch break, had known since then that the life she had been building was about to be torn apart. But what Mrs. Chen did not know, and what the social workers would never understand, was that Emma was the only reason Sofia had not walked into the harbor and simply let the water take her. Emma was the reason she counted tips down to the penny. Emma was the reason she ate the cold remnants of other people's dinners, the reason she stole medicine from the facility supply room to treat Emma's asthma because she could not afford an inhaler, the reason she carried those tiny worn shoes like a prayer. Meanwhile, in the penthouse, Aleandro watched the surveillance screens flicker to a new timestamp. Sofia was gone from Mercy Elder Care now. It was past 3 in the morning. She was somewhere else, doing something else, probably meeting with her contact, probably exchanging information for cash. Rocco shifted his weight, and Gino's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, the way men do when they sense their boss is about to make a decision that will change the texture of the night. Aleandro did not move. His voice, when it came, was absolute as stone. Find out where she goes. Find out who she meets. Find out everything. Then bring her to me alive. I want her to understand, in her last moments, why betrayal is not forgiven in this family. I want her to see the price written in blood. The two men exchanged a glance neither had worn in years. This was going to be bad. This was going to be the kind of bad that echoed through Boston's underworld for months. He did not know that the woman he was about to destroy had saved a child's life. He did not know that those bags held food stolen from the facility kitchen, bottles of water, blankets she had bought with money that should have gone toward her foreclosure. He did not know that Sofia Reynolds, the invisible woman he had decided to kill, was far more dangerous than he could possibly imagine, because she had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The storm outside intensified. Wind tore through the streets like a blade wrapped in ice. And neither of them, the powerful man in the penthouse and the desperate woman in the diner, understood that they were about to collide in ways that would shatter everything they thought they knew about loyalty, family, and the meaning of worth. Before we continue, if this story is hitting you in the chest, drop a like. Share this with someone you know who needs to hear that invisible people matter. Subscribe so you do not miss what happens next, because what is coming will change everything. Now, let us go back. Let us understand how a woman with $34 and a pair of worn shoes became the center of a war she never knew existed. Let us go back to where Sofia's story truly began, to the day that set everything in motion. The fluorescent lights above the kitchen at Mercy Elder Care hummed their constant, sickly song, and Sofia Reynolds stood at the sink at 6 in the morning, watching her own reflection fracture across the wet surface of Mrs. Chen's dinner plate. The old woman had eaten only the soft parts, leaving behind mashed potatoes crusted with gravy, and Sofia scraped them onto her palm, cold and congealing, and ate them standing over the industrial trash bin because this would be all she consumed today and tomorrow the portions would get smaller. Her uniform was stained with other people's spilled juice. Her hands, which had been soft once, were now mapped with calluses and burned scars from the industrial dishwasher, the skin around her fingernails cracked and bleeding in thin lines. She wore her brown hair pulled back so tight it gave her a permanent expression of shock, and beneath her eyes sat dark purple crescents that no amount of sleep could erase, though she never slept anyway. The break room was empty. Sofia counted the crumpled bills from her pockets onto the plastic table in the fluorescent darkness, each note a small prayer she could not quite finish. $34. That was the sum total of her existence after 2 16-hour shifts and a collection of tips stolen from her by the restaurant manager who claimed he was keeping them safe. $34 between her and absolute nothing. She folded them twice and pressed them into the front pocket of her jeans, feeling the small weight of it like a blade, like something sharp and dangerous. 2 weeks, she thought. She had 2 weeks before everything ended. The certified letter had arrived at her apartment building's mailbox 3 days ago, and she had not told anyone. The envelope was thick, official, the kind of paper that did not bend easily, and when she opened it in the hallway with trembling hands, the numbers seemed to float upward from the page and lodge themselves behind her eyes where they continued burning even now. $125,000. The figure was printed in black ink and underlined twice, as if the bank could not believe it either. Medical debt from her sister Emma's dialysis treatments, now deceased 3 years but still owed, plus emergency hospital bills, plus court fees, plus a final notice in bold letters, foreclosure proceedings initiated. Property to be seized in 14 days. She had slid down the mailbox wall that morning and sat on the grimy tile floor of the building's entrance for an hour, not crying because crying required energy she did not have, just holding the letter and reading it over and over as if the numbers might change, as if there existed some mathematical error that could be corrected by reading it enough times. There was not. The numbers were exact. They were absolute. And they meant that the small, cramped apartment where she slept in 3-hour increments was no longer hers to sleep in. Douglas Hale found her during the lunch service at the diner that same evening, trapped her between the walk-in freezer and the supply shelves in the kitchen where the noise of the dining room could not reach them. He was 62 years old with liver spots on his hands that looked like continents, and he owned not just this diner but 2 hotels across Boston, and he used all of that ownership like a weapon. His breath smelled of bourbon at noon and scotch by evening, and he stood too close to Sofia now, blocking the door so that leaving would mean pressing past him, would mean touching him, and he knew this and he smiled because he knew this. "Your tips are short again, Sofia," he said, and his voice was the texture of rust. "The customers are not leaving you much anymore. Perhaps you are not making them comfortable. Perhaps you need to be more friendly." His hand moved to her lower back, fingers spreading across the fabric of her shirt, and Sofia felt her spine tighten, felt her breath catch like a hook in her throat. She could not afford to flinch. She could not afford to have him decide she was not worth keeping on the schedule. She could not afford to lose this job for 2 more weeks, 14 days exactly until they locked her out of everything. "I'll work harder, Mr. Hale," she said, and the words tasted like pennies. "I know you will," he said, and his fingers pressed slightly deeper. "I need you to work tonight without pay. The health inspector is coming tomorrow, and I need everything perfect. You understand perfect, don't you?" She understood. She understood that understanding was not optional. 3 blocks away, in a mansion that overlooked Boston Harbor, a woman named Sophie Langford was pouring herself a second glass of wine at 4 in the afternoon, and on the screen of her iPad, she was reading the comments on a photograph she had posted from last week's charity gala. The post showed the gala's attendees in their designer dresses and jewelry, and the caption read, "So grateful for those who understand that true charity comes from a place of moral integrity. Not everyone who works with vulnerable populations has the right intentions." The photograph did not show Sofia Reynolds, but the comment section was filled with the wives and daughters and friends of Boston's wealthy elite, and they were responding with knowing nods and half-formed accusations, whispers that had no proof but required none. "Some people use access as a cover for less wholesome activities," one woman had written. "Has anyone looked into her background?" another asked. Sophie Langford was 73 years old and had inherited both her fortune and her position on the city's licensing board from a husband who had died 15 years ago and had never learned to refuse her anything. She had watched Sofia Reynolds arrive at the senior facility 6 months ago, had noticed the way the old people smiled around her, the way they seemed to want to live longer just to see her face in the doorway. And something in Sophie Langford, something small and bitter and long buried, had recognized that Sofia possessed something that money could not purchase and age could not restore. She was needed. She mattered. And Sophie Langford had spent 73 years discovering that mattering was the one currency she had never been able to acquire. So she had started whispering. Not lies exactly, but the kinds of truths that felt like lies when repeated enough times. A woman living alone with a child who did not belong to her. A woman who left the facility during her shift, who carried bags, who seemed to have secrets. A woman whose past was murky and whose intentions were unclear. The whispers had spread like water finding cracks, and now there were conversations happening in country clubs and benefit dinners about Sofia Reynolds, conversations she would never hear but would feel in the way people began to look at her differently, the way job opportunities that had seemed possible suddenly became impossible. Sofia pushed open the heavy door of the shelter at 11:17 at night, and the first thing she heard was the small sound of a child's breathing from the darkness of the back room. Emma was 7 years old but looked younger, looked as though she had been condensed by loss, by the weight of existing without permission. She had dark hair that fell to her shoulders and eyes that had learned early how to calculate risk, and when she heard Sofia's footsteps, she ran. "Sophie, you came," Emma whispered, and the words carried the weight of a question Sofia heard every time. "Did you come back? Did you choose to come back? Will you always come back?" Sofia knelt down and held her, felt the small bones of the child's shoulders, the rapid heartbeat against her chest like a bird trapped in a cage. "Always, baby. I always come back." She pulled from her bag the small worn shoes, the first pair Emma had arrived in 6 months ago when her mother had disappeared and there had been no one else to claim her, and Sofia had taken her because the alternative was unthinkable. The shoes were soft now, the leather creased in all the places tiny feet had bent and flexed, and they smelled like dust and childhood and impermanence. "You kept them?" Emma asked, touching the fabric gently, as if it might dissolve under her fingers. "I keep everything that matters," Sofia said, and she meant it in a way that stretched far beyond objects, that encompassed every conversation, every moment of this child's existence that she had tried to preserve, to protect, to make mean something in a world that had decided Emma was disposable. What Sofia did not know, as she sat in the darkness of the shelter holding a child whose life was constructed entirely of fragile, temporary arrangements, was that 3 hours earlier, a man named Aleandro had been watching surveillance footage of her moving through the corridors of Mercy Elder Care at 2 in the morning, carrying those same bags, and that he had already made a decision about what her presence meant. She did not know that Emma had spent that afternoon playing with a child in the neighborhood, a boy she had mentioned casually, and that boy carried in his pocket a photograph taken by his nanny, and that photograph would arrive on Aleandro's desk tomorrow morning and change everything that was about to happen. She did not know that the wind outside was beginning to turn, that the storm that had been building for 3 days was about to make landfall, and that in exactly 72 hours, the careful boundaries between her invisible world and the world of power and control would shatter like glass hitting concrete. All she knew, holding Emma in the darkness, was that she had 14 days to solve an impossible equation, and the numbers never changed no matter how many times she rearranged them in her mind. 14 days. $125,000. And $34 in her pocket that meant absolutely nothing at all. The wind howled through the diner parking lot like a blade wrapped in ice, and the neon sign above Miller's flickered against the darkness, casting sickly green light across empty snow. Sofia Reynolds sat in the corner booth, the checkered floor beneath her feet black and white like a chessboard she had lost. 3:22 in the morning. The clock on the wall ticked with surgical precision, each second another dollar she did not have. She counted the bills again. $34. Wrinkled ones and fives, some of them coins she had scraped from the bottom of her bag. The foreclosure notice lay crumpled beside her, cold coffee rings staining the edges. $125,000 owed in 14 days. The math never changed no matter how many times her trembling fingers arranged the numbers. The smell of stale coffee hung heavy in the silence, mixing with the ghost of grease from the lunch shift. Sofia had worked here before, knew the smell of a place that had seen better days. Now she just lived in it, counting and recounting, hoping the numbers would somehow transform into something bearable. The bell above the door jangled violent and sudden. A man stumbled through, snow cascading behind him like a white wall collapsing inward. He was older, maybe 60, his face the color of weathered concrete. His hand clutched his chest and his breathing came in short, desperate gasps. His lips were turning blue at the edges. Sofia stood without thinking. She moved toward him as he collapsed against the counter, his legs giving way, his body sliding down like a puppet with its strings cut. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, swimming with panic and pain. "My heart," he gasped. Medication. I need my medication. His voice was a whisper dragged through gravel. My wallet, the prescription. Sofia knelt beside him, her hands moving on instinct. She checked his jacket pockets with practiced efficiency, the kind of efficiency that comes from desperation. Her fingers found a hospital bill crumpled in the inside pocket. $800 for emergency cardiac medication. The man's wallet, when she found it, contained $12 and a social security card that read Victor Chen. The pharmacist number was printed at the bottom of the bill. Sofia's phone was in her other pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands, looked at Victor's graying face, at the shallow rise and fall of his chest. She thought of Emma waiting at the shelter. She thought of the $34 in her purse that she had been rationing for food until the foreclosure papers came. She dialed. 24-hour pharmacy. The voice on the other end was tired, automated. I need to pay for a prescription, Sofia said, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. Emergency medication. For cardiac patients. $800. My name is Sofia Reynolds, I work at Mercy Elder Care, you can verify, but I need it released immediately. This man is dying. Silence on the line. We require payment before release of controlled medications. Sofia's eyes burned. I have $34. I understand that. I will bring the rest tomorrow, or next week, I will work it off, I will do anything. Please. He is dying. Another pause. The pharmacist could hear the desperation, could hear it in the exact timbre of her voice, the way someone begs only when they truly understand what loss means. I can release half the dose for $34, the pharmacist said finally. You'll need to bring the rest by tomorrow night or we halt treatment. Sofia did not hesitate. She grabbed her jacket, left Victor in the diner with the owner calling an ambulance. The blizzard hit her like a physical force when she pushed through the door, wind tearing at her face, snow stinging her exposed skin. The pharmacy was 3 blocks away, but it might as well have been 3 miles. Her breath crystallized in front of her face. Her thin jacket, the only one she owned, was not designed for this kind of cold. She ran anyway. The wind screamed around the corners of buildings. Her feet slipped on ice hidden beneath the snow. Her lungs burned with each breath of cold air. She thought of Victor's blue lips, his eyes rolling back. She thought of the $12 in his wallet and how it meant nothing at all against $800. The pharmacy appeared like a beacon through the white chaos. Sofia pushed through the glass doors, gasping, snow melting down her face. The pharmacist behind the counter looked up, startled by the wild-eyed woman dripping onto the linoleum. Victor Chen, Sofia said between breaths. Cardiac medication. I have $34 cash. Right now. She placed every bill and coin on the counter. The pharmacist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes that had seen their share of human desperation, reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small white paper bag. Half the dose, she said quietly. You bring the rest by tomorrow night, we keep him alive. You don't show up. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Sofia ran back through the blizzard. What Sofia did not know, in those moments when she was fighting against the wind with her pockets empty and her heart full, was that Victor Chen was not simply a dying man. He was Aleandro Castellano's most trusted lieutenant, a man who had served for 17 years without question or failure. And in the diner, as the ambulance pulled up and paramedics rushed inside, Victor was watching Sofia through half-closed eyes, memorizing her face, understanding exactly what kind of person she was. With trembling hands, he texted a single message to a number that very few people possessed. Woman at Miller's Diner saved my life. Gave her last money. Pale, desperate. Find everything. The message went to Rocco, who was in a car 2 blocks away, waiting for updates from a business meeting that Victor was supposed to attend. At 8:34 the next morning, Aleandro Castellano stood in his office overlooking the snow-covered city of Boston. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the entire downtown district, the snow piling up in drifts against the streets below. His office was 40 stories up, and at this height, the city looked small, manageable, like something he could hold in the palm of his hand. Rocco entered without knocking. This was permitted. Rocco had been permitted certain liberties for 15 years. "Victor is stable," Rocco said, placing a folder on the glass desk. "Whatever medication he got last night probably saved him. But here's what's strange. The pharmacy was paid in cash. $34. 34. Aleandro did not look up from the window. His profile was sharp, angular, carved from something harder than flesh. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, a reminder of a lesson learned in his 20s about mercy and weakness. "Who paid?" His voice was quiet, which was worse than if he had shouted. Rocco opened the folder. "A woman named Sofia Reynolds. Works double shifts at Mercy Elder Care. Sends every dollar to her sister's dialysis fund. Last night she gave her emergency money to save Victor's life. And here's what you need to see." Rocco pulled out photographs taken from security cameras. Sofia in the diner at 3:22 a.m., counting her pathetic stack of bills. Sofia running through the blizzard with her thin jacket insufficient against the cold. Sofia at the pharmacy window, handing over what appeared to be her entire world. The bag she's been moving through the elder care facility. Rocco continued. "We thought you were right about her being a mole, an informant. But the bags contain food and blankets. She's been running them to a shelter on Commonwealth Avenue. For a child." Aleandro's jaw tightened. He turned from the window. "What child?" 7-year-old girl. Undocumented. Emma. Sofia's been protecting her for 8 months. Gino entered then, carrying a laptop. He placed it on the desk without being asked. "Sir, we found something else. Financial records show Sofia has $125,000 in medical and legal debt. Foreclosure notice filed 5 days ago. She has 14 days before she loses everything. 14 days. $125,000. And she gave 34 of her last dollars to save a stranger's life." Aleandro sat down slowly. His men had learned never to speak when he was silent like this, when his mind was working through the implications of something. In the distance, the city hummed with the sound of traffic and wind and the ordinary machinery of people trying to survive. "Show me the surveillance of Emma," Aleandro said finally. Gino's fingers moved across the laptop. The screen filled with video from the shelter's outdoor camera. A small girl with dark hair played in the yard, running, laughing, building something out of snow. And then another child entered the frame. A boy. 5 years old. Blonde hair. Wearing a blue jacket. Aleandro stood so suddenly his chair fell backward. "That boy," he said, and his voice was different now, fractured. "That is my son." The shelter called social services at 4:53 p.m. By 5:30, Aleandro was standing in the hallway, Rocco and Gino flanking him like shadows given substance. Emma sat in an office chair that was far too big for her, swinging her small feet, terrified of the large man with the scarred face watching her with an intensity that felt like fire. "She said I should stay here," Emma whispered. "Sofia said she'd come get me." Outside, the blizzard had intensified. Roads were closing. The city was becoming sealed off by weather. The door burst open at 6:11 p.m. Sofia stumbled inside, snow covering her entire body, her lips pale, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Ice clung to her hair. Her hands were raw from the cold. She had walked 3 miles through a blizzard that the weather service had labeled dangerous, unsuitable for travel. She saw Emma and moved toward her immediately, protectively, placing her body between the child and the large men in suits. "Don't take her," Sofia said, and her voice was barely a whisper, barely a sound at all. "Please don't take her. I'll do anything. Whatever you want, I'll do it. Just don't take Emma." Aleandro watched her. This woman who had given $34 to save a stranger. This woman who had walked through a blizzard for a child. This woman who had nothing and yet was willing to sacrifice what little remained. You walked through a blizzard, Aleandro said quietly. She's a child, Sofia replied. What else matters? And in that moment, something shifted in the air between them, something neither of them could name or control. 20 minutes later, Sofia sat in the shelter's small office, wrapped in a thermal blanket that Rocco had produced from somewhere. Her hand still shook as she held a cup of hot coffee. Emma sat beside her, asleep against her shoulder, one of Sofia's worn scarves wrapped around the child like armor. Aleandro sat across from them, and the fact that he was sitting at eye level, in a chair, showing his vulnerable side, was shocking enough that Rocco and Gino exchanged a look that said everything. Your last $34, Aleandro began. Victor told me what happened. Sofia looked at him properly for the first time, and fear flickered across her face. I don't understand how you... I know everything in this city, Aleandro said. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the weight of absolute certainty. Your debt. Your foreclosure. Your sister's dialysis treatments. Everything. Sofia's body went rigid. How? Why didn't you ask for help? Aleandro continued, ignoring her question. Sofia laughed then, a sound like breaking glass. From who? I'm nobody. I eat leftover food from meal trays before they get thrown away. I send every dollar, literally every dollar, to my sister because her insurance won't cover dialysis, so it's $47,000 every single month. I have been drowning for 2 years. Her voice was rising now, and she didn't seem to notice. Douglas Hale steals my tips. Forces unpaid overtime. Threatens to fire me if I report him. Sophie Langford tells everyone in Boston that I'm some kind of criminal, that I'm dangerous, that I'm not to be trusted. And I had $34, Mr. Whoever you are. I had $34 and a child who needed protecting and an apartment I'm about to lose, and now the bank takes everything in 14 days. Emma goes into the system. And I couldn't even keep one child safe. She was crying now, exhausted, the emotion tearing out of her like something that had been held back for far too long. Aleandro stood and walked to the window. Snow fell in thick sheets against the glass. In 15 years of employing these men, Rocco and Gino had never seen their boss stand in silence like this, wrestling with something internal. When he turned back, his voice was steady. You kept my son alive. That photograph, it means he is alive. 8 months ago, I buried him in my mind. You gave me hope when hope was buried. He took a step closer. I will pay your debt. All of it. $125,000. Tonight. Sofia's breath stopped. What? No. Why would you help me? I'm nobody. There must be a cost. What do you want? Help me find my son, Aleandro said. Stay with Emma. Let me protect you both. Rocco whispered to Gino, in 15 years, I've never seen him like this. Sofia's phone rang at 9:15 p.m. Where are you? Douglas Hale's voice on the other end was venomous. You missed your shift. You're terminated, Sofia. And I'll make sure you never work in this city again. You know too much about things that don't concern you. Sofia, with Aleandro watching, said quietly, I quit, Mr. Hale. She hung up. Across the city, in his office, Douglas Hale's face turned purple with rage. He dialed another number immediately. Sophie Langford answered on the second ring. Yes? The Reynolds woman is becoming a problem, Hale said. We need to accelerate. Sophie, who was sipping wine in her mansion overlooking the harbor, smiled without warmth. Tomorrow morning, I'll make an anonymous call to social services. Child endangerment. The undocumented child in her care. She'll be arrested by the weekend. She paused, and her voice dropped into something colder. Some people need to learn their place. What neither of them knew was that Aleandro Castellano never forgot a name, never forgave a threat against someone under his protection, and was already making plans. The storm would pass, but not before it destroyed everything in its path. The Charles River at 4:44 in the morning does not care about human suffering. It churns black and indifferent beneath the bridge, rain mixing with snow in the freezing darkness, wind that cuts like a blade wrapped in ice. Sofia Reynolds stands on the railing, her body soaked through, the tiny pair of children's shoes clutched against her chest. Her coat hangs from her shoulders like a surrender flag. Below, the water froths and pools at nothing, waiting. 3 days have passed since Aleandro promised to save her. 3 days since the bank moved the foreclosure through anyway, Sophie Langford's influence spreading like poison through the system, a woman who breaks people for sport. 3 days since social services arrived at the nursing home where Sofia worked, took Emma by the hand, and walked the 7-year-old away while she screamed. The anonymous tip about an undocumented child. Perfect timing. Devastating precision. Sofia closes her eyes. The rain stings her face. Maybe everyone would be better off. Emma will find a real family, one with a house and food and a future that doesn't depend on a woman who counts pennies at 3 in the morning. Aleandro will find his son without her slowing him down, without her broken promises and empty pockets. She is just a waitress who eats other people's leftovers, scraping congealed gravy from the edges of plates that belong to strangers. She is nobody. She has always been nobody. She leans forward. The wind roars. The water calls. Her phone buzzes in her pocket at 4:49 a.m. Sofia freezes. Her hand moves on instinct, pulls the phone out with trembling fingers. Water drips from the screen. A text message glows through the darkness, a voice smuggled from a foster placement somewhere across the city, words typed by a child's careful fingers. Sophie, I love you, please don't give up. Sofia reads it once. Reads it again. The words blur through her tears, and something cracks open inside her chest, not hope, not yet, but something close. Something that says maybe, just maybe, a 7-year-old girl loves her enough to break the rules and reach through the dark. She climbs down from the railing. Her knees hit the wet pavement and she collapses there, soaked and shaking, clutching the phone and the tiny shoes like they are the only solid things left in the world. She will not give up. Not yet. Not for Emma. The decision arrives not as courage but as obligation, and obligation is sometimes enough to keep you alive. At 5:12 a.m., Rocco finds her. He is moving through the pre-dawn grey like a ghost, checking the bridge for the 3rd time in 4 hours. Aleandro's search has covered the entire city, black SUVs pulling into parking garages, men in suits questioning anyone Sofia had spoken to in the last 72 hours, resources deployed without mercy because Aleandro does not accept loss. When Rocco sees her collapsed on the pavement, he carries her to the car without speaking, one arm beneath her shoulders, steady and efficient. 20 minutes later, they are in Aleandro's penthouse. The space is all glass and steel and views that cost more than Sofia earned in 5 years. Aleandro stands at the window watching the city wake up, his silhouette carved from shadow. When he turns and sees her face, the bruised eyes, the wet hair, the way her lips have gone pale from cold, something in his expression shatters like glass. He crosses the room in 4 strides. Don't you ever, he says, his voice cracking on the words, don't you leave. His hands cup her face with a gentleness that seems impossible from a man built like a weapon. Not like that. Not ever. I would burn the world to find you. Sofia's voice comes out shattered. They took Emma. They took everything. The bank closed the foreclosure. Sophie Langford, she destroyed me. And now Emma thinks I abandoned her. She thinks I chose to leave. Aleandro's jaw tightens. His eyes go cold and focused, the look of a man who has made a decision that will change the shape of the world. He steps back and pulls out his phone. When he speaks into it, his voice is steady as iron. Gino. Tell me everything you have found. 12 hours later, in the war room of Aleandro's private office, the evidence spreads across the mahogany table like a confession written in financial records and falsified documents. Gino presents it with the precision of someone who has spent 72 hours destroying the lives of two people who believed themselves untouchable. Douglas Hale, Gino says, his finger tracing the numbers, has been skimming employee tips for 12 years. $234,000 stolen from people making minimum wage. He falsified tax documents to hide it. Hotel inspections failed that should have passed. He has been operating a fraud scheme on 3 properties. Rocco leans forward. And Sophie Langford. Connected at every level, Gino continues. She approved his hotel licenses despite the violations. She took $3 million in bribes from developers in exchange for zoning approvals. She orchestrated the early foreclosure on Sophia's house personally. Called the bank president, told him it was a priority closure. She did it to hurt her. To watch her suffer. Aleandro stands motionless, his hands flat on the table. When he speaks, his voice is like thunder rolling across a distant sky. They are working together to cover fraud. And they targeted her because they could. Because they thought she was nobody. He raises his eyes to the men gathered around him. Then we give them exactly what they deserve. Federal cooperation. Full immunity for my organization in exchange for the evidence that puts both of them away for decades. Rocco, set it up. Gino, prepare the files. They will move at dawn. At 6:41 in the morning, while the city is still sleeping, 12 federal agents in tactical gear move simultaneously with 12 of Aleandro's men. The storm has arrived. The wind howls through the streets like it knows what is coming. First target, Douglas Hale's house in the suburbs, a brick colonial with black shutters and a manicured lawn that cost more than Sophia made in 3 years. The FBI battering ram hits the door at 6:51 a.m. Wood splinters. Glass breaks. Douglas Hale stumbles out of bed in his underwear, face white with panic and rage. He is a man accustomed to power, to intimidating vulnerable people, to walking through rooms without consequence. He has never seen his own consequence before. What is this? He screams. You can't. Douglas Hale, the lead agent says, her badge gleaming in the early light, you are under arrest for wage theft, tax evasion, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. The handcuffs close around his wrists. News cameras are already on the lawn, neighbors standing in their robes watching a man's empire collapse in 30 seconds. Hale sees the cameras. Sees the neighbors. Sees the moment his life becomes a public spectacle of destruction. He collapses. His knees buckle. He trembles like a cornered animal, like something backed into a corner with no escape. Please, he sobs, I'll pay it back, please, I have a family. The agent's voice is ice. So did the 47 employees you stole from. They had families too. They counted pennies while you took vacations. He is led to the vehicle in handcuffs, crying, cameras flashing, every news channel in Boston broadcasting it live. This is the beginning of the end for a man who thought himself invincible. At 6:54 a.m., 12 blocks away, Sophie Langford sits in her mansion overlooking the harbor. She is drinking her morning coffee, black with no sugar, the cup porcelain so fine it costs more than Sophia's entire wardrobe. She is reading the news on her tablet when federal agents flood her dining room. They move fast, professional, unstoppable. Sophie stands, imperious, her face arranging itself into the expression of a woman who has never been told no. Do you know who I am? I control the licensing board for this entire city. I will have your badges for this trespass. Sophie Langford, the lead agent says, her voice carrying no sympathy, you are under arrest for bribery, corruption, and abuse of public office. Sophie's face goes from arrogant to terrified in 3 seconds. The transformation is complete and devastating. This is a mistake. I have connections. The mayor called me just last week. The governor's wife is a personal friend. You cannot do this. The mayor is cooperating with our investigation, the agent says. And he has already turned over your communications. You are done. Sophie is walked out past her staff, past the cameras, her face appearing on every news screen in the city. The woman who destroyed reputations for sport, who whispered cruel comments into the ears of powerful people, who orchestrated the suffering of a woman she deemed beneath notice, that woman is destroyed in seconds by the very power she thought protected her. 6 weeks later, the courthouse echoes with the sound of a gavel falling. Douglas Hale stands before the judge, his attorney beside him, his face gaunt from the jail cells and the reality of consequence. The judge's voice carries no mercy. You are sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. Full restitution of $234,000 to be returned to the employees you defrauded. All assets seized and liquidated to cover court costs. You will spend the remainder of your life in a cell, Mr. Hale, contemplating what you took from people who had nothing. Hale weeps in the defendant's chair. His attorney touches his arm, but there is nothing to say. The sentence is absolute. Sophie Langford's hearing is identical in its brutality. 42 years in federal prison. $3 million in fines. Every property seized. Your charitable foundation dissolved and its assets transferred to community development. You used your position to prey on the vulnerable, Ms. Langford. Justice is not death. It is accountability. It is living with the knowledge of what you have done. Sophie sits stone-faced, but her hands shake. She grips the table edge so hard her knuckles go white. For the first time in her life, Sophie Langford understands that money and connections cannot save you when the machinery of justice finally turns in your direction. 3 days later, in the courthouse hallway at 2:15 p.m., Social Services releases Emma to Sofia with full custody. The charges are revealed as fabricated. The system corrects itself, slowly, imperfectly, but it corrects. Emma runs through the hallway in her small shoes, her hair braided by foster care workers who tried their best, her eyes wild with the knowledge that she was coming home. Sofia catches her, falls to her knees, holds the 7-year-old girl like she is the most precious thing that has ever existed. I will never let you go, Sofia whispers into Emma's hair. I will never give up on you. I promise. Emma's small arms wrap around her neck. I knew you wouldn't. I knew you loved me. Across the hallway, Aleandro watches with Rocco beside him. His expression is unreadable, his eyes fixed on Sofia as she holds the child, the tiny shoes now framed on Sofia's apartment wall, a permanent reminder that she survived something that should have destroyed her. Rocco speaks quietly. You got her everything. Aleandro doesn't answer for a long moment. His jaw works. Something passes through his eyes that looks almost like pain. She saved Victor. She saved me. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But what neither of them knew was that Sofia had already written the letter. It sat in an envelope in her apartment, addressed in careful handwriting, the words inside carrying a decision that would break Aleandro Castellano in ways that bullets and betrayal never could. She planned to disappear before he could stop her. The storm has passed. The rain has stopped. But Sofia stands at her window that evening and understands that saving someone and staying with them are two entirely different things. And she is still trying to decide which one she is brave enough to do. 1 week later, the apartment that Aleandro paid for sits flooded with morning light, and Sofia Reynolds sits at the kitchen table with her hands shaking so badly that the pen trembles against the lined paper. Emma is at school. The city moves below the windows in its ordinary way, cars and pedestrians and people who have no idea that a woman is about to vanish from the life that saved her. She writes, Aleandro, you gave me everything. My debt is paid. Emma is safe. You found your son because of her photograph, and your family is whole again. But I see the danger around you every day. Men with guns. Enemies who would hurt anyone close to you. I am a caretaker who eats leftovers and counts pennies. I don't belong in your world. If I stay, I will only endanger you and everything you have built. Her handwriting is careful, deliberate, the letters pressed hard into the paper as if she can force the truth of these words through sheer will. She folds the single page twice. Places it on the counter. weighs it down with the small framed shoes, Emma's first pair, worn through at the heels, still holding the shape of a child who had nothing. Sofia packs one bag. The modest dress she wore before Aleandro. Her uniform from Mercy Elder Care. A sweater with a hole in the shoulder. The accumulation of her life takes up less space than a businessman's carry-on. She looks around the apartment one final time, at the clean windows, the furniture that doesn't wobble, the refrigerator that is always full. This was never hers. It was always borrowed. And borrowed things must be returned. At 2:34 p.m., she picks Emma up from school early. The 7-year-old bounds toward her in her new shoes that cost more than Sofia's weekly salary, her braided hair swinging, her joy absolute and devastating. "Where are we going?" Emma asks, immediately sensing something has changed in the way Sofia holds her hand. "On an adventure, baby," Sofia says, and it is not quite a lie. "Somewhere safe." The Boston bus station at 4:12 p.m. smells like diesel fuel and desperation, like every bus station in every country, a place where people go when they need to disappear. Sofia buys 2 tickets to Portland with cash she has been saving for 3 weeks, every dollar a small rebellion against staying. Emma sits beside her on the plastic bench, her small leg swinging, her hand wrapped around Sofia's wrist. "When are we coming back?" Emma whispers. Sofia cannot answer. Her throat closes. She keeps her eyes on the departure board and counts down the minutes. 3, 2, 1. The station doors open like a mouth-swallowing light. Aleandro Castellano walks through them at 4:08 p.m., and the world stops rotating. He moves with Rocco and Gino flanking him, their dark suits moving through the fluorescent brightness like shadows that refuse to accept daylight. His jaw is set. His eyes find her before he has taken 5 steps. Sofia stands, but he is already there. "You wrote me a letter," Aleandro says. His voice is not thunder. It is something quieter and more devastating, a knife wrapped in velvet. "You weren't supposed to find it yet," Sofia whispers. "I arrived at 3:08 p.m. Rocco found your note 17 minutes later." He holds up the crumpled paper, her own handwriting staring back at her. "You think you're protecting me by leaving?" "I know I am," Sofia says, and her hands are fists because if she opens them she will reach for him and the bus will leave without them and she will have made the wrong choice. "Your enemies, they'll hurt me to get to you. I've seen enough violence. I won't be the reason." "Your fear is not my burden to carry," Aleandro interrupts, and there is something in his eyes that looks almost like shattering. "Do you understand what you did? Do you understand what you have been to me?" Emma tugs Sofia's hand. The child's voice is small. "Sophie, I'm scared." Sofia looks at her daughter, the word daughter sits in her chest like a seed that has finally begun to grow, and then she looks at Aleandro. "I'm scared too." "Then we will be scared together," Aleandro says, and this is not how she expected him to respond. She expected ultimatums. Commands. The voice of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. Instead, his hand reaches out slowly, as if approaching something that might break. "I am not asking you to understand my world. I am asking you to let me understand yours. I want to know why you love the elderly residents you care for. I want to know what your favorite meal is when you're not eating leftovers. I want to know the name of the woman who raised you before the system took her. I want to build something with you that isn't about safety or protection or what I can provide. I want to know Sofia Reynolds as if she is a person worth knowing, not because she survived something terrible, but because she is here. Now. Choosing." Rocco and Gino turn away, their shoulders speaking a language of respect. The bus announcement crackles over the intercom. Final boarding for Portland. Sofia's breath comes out like a prayer. "If I stay, I don't become what you want me to become. I won't learn to wear expensive dresses and drink champagne. I won't forget where I came from." "Good," Aleandro says. "Wear your uniforms. Drink water. Never forget." That is who I fell in love with, a woman who counts $34 and still finds money to help a stranger. That is not someone I want to change. Sofia takes his hand. Emma takes his other hand. They walk toward the ticket counter together, and Sofia cancels their reservation. The bus leaves without them at 4:15 p.m., carrying only empty seats. 6 months later, the apartment, the home, because it has become a home, exists in a state of ordinary grace. Emma runs through the garden, her laughter carrying through the windows like bells, and Sofia watches her from the kitchen as she prepares dinner from her own recipes, not from leftover trays. The tiny shoes hang in the hallway, framed in gold, a permanent reminder of where the story began. Aleandro appears beside her, his hand settling on her waist. "You changed everything," he says. "No," Sofia tells him. "I just stayed." In a federal prison 40 miles away, Douglas Hale mops toilet tiles, his aging hands raw and cracked, his power transformed into nothing. Sophie Langford sits in a different facility, her designer clothes replaced by orange fabric, her social standing erased, her name scrolling across news feeds only when they mention federal fraud and elder abuse charges. Justice is not death. It is living with the knowledge of what you did every single day, until that knowledge becomes the prison and the walls become almost irrelevant. The moral of this story breathes in the space between Sofia's courage and Aleandro's choice. It lives in the tiny shoes hanging in the hallway and in the letter she wrote, and the letter she did not have to mail. It exists in this fundamental truth: nobody is born invisible. Nobody is born insignificant. The world makes you invisible through cruelty, through indifference, through the systematic belief that some people do not matter. But one person can change that belief. One person can choose to see you. And sometimes, one person is enough to save you. Not from your circumstances, but from the lie that you were ever meant to drown in them. If this story moved you, if Sofia's courage spoke to something inside your own chest, then drop a like right now. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that they are not nobody. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because tomorrow we will show you another story that will challenge the way you see the world and the people around you. Leave a comment below and tell us, what would you have done with your last $34? Would you have helped a stranger? Or would you have run? The storm passes. The rain stops. The sun emerges through the clouds and illuminates a terrace where two people stand, not because destiny demanded it, but because they both chose to stay. Emma and Aleandro's son play in the garden below, their laughter a proof of something beautiful that was built from compassion. Remember this: you are far stronger than you think. No matter how hard life gets, the sky always clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you in the next video.